and welcome to our first online lecture in regard to risk management. I have to tell you, speaking of risk, today I'm recording this from home because we're in the middle of Typhoon 8. And I'll relate to that here in terms of what we're dealing with later in terms of the risk aspect of it. I'm actually going to record this lecture in several parts because I want to make sure that your attention span is there for about 15 minutes at a time, and also because that's what I found out YouTube only takes up to 15 minutes. All right, first off, what we're going to cover is analyzing and evaluating risks and planning, and we'll deal with most of those in the first part. And then we'll get to the issue of risk management from an emergency perspective. So analyzing and evaluating risk, let's begin there. Now we're talking about analyzing and evaluating risks regards to meetings. You'll find in your readings by Julia Rutherford Silvers, who's one of the, if not the most authoritative person in this area as far as meetings are concerned. The cause and effect analysis, we'll talk more about that, the Fishbone diagram. Constraint analysis, what are our limitations? We won't talk more specifically on that one, but that's one of the types. Decision tree analysis, evaluating different types of responses, another very good approach. Fault tree analysis, which starts with the negative outcome and kind of goes back to where things might occur. Influence diagram, the interrelationships, we'll talk a little more about that. And the probability and severity matrix. Let's start with the fishbone. I kind of like this one. It's a fun one to do, and hopefully you'll get a chance to do some of these. You start with the effect and say, all right, what are the things that cause it, and what are the areas that we have to deal with within each one of those? So if you say, here's the effect, then you say, all right, people, equipment, policies, procedures, and then what are the potential causes from those? And we'll go through one of those more specifically related to an issue in meetings in a few minutes. The decision tree analysis, another good approach. In this case, you know what the risk is, and then you have, say, alternative A and alternative B, and you look at the benefits, costs, and secondary risks of each one. So let's take, for example, today. Let's say I was having a meeting today on September 29th, Thursday, and I had a typhoon warning, Typhoon 8, and I anticipated that this might happen beforehand. So alternative A might be, well, we go ahead with the meeting because most of our people are already here, they're staying in the hotel, we don't have any cost factors involved with that. The secondary risk might be some of the local attendees may not be able to attend, maybe there's people who can't get out, or maybe there's a last minute speaker who can't get in, something of that nature. And then we have alternative B. Alternative B might be the other scenario where we cancel or postpone the meeting. And then what are the benefits to that? Well, it appears we're going along with the safety and security kinds of issues. Could be a big cost to us. Secondary risk, try and find a second location. How do we deal with that? Those are the kind of things that you might go through a decision tree on, two different kinds of approaches. The influence diagram is a good one to look at a particular part of an event or a meeting and how it affects every other aspect of it. So in this case, you see an example of a celebrity appearance. If you have a celebrity or a high-profile speaker coming in, it can affect your attendance, your budget, the catering aspect of things, the facilities, program, promotion, site plan, security, ticketing, everything. So you look at that event and how it affects every aspect of it. So it might be a big positive on the attendance side, but it might be a big negative in terms of the aspect of security, which might end up costing you more money, and so on and so on. The probability and severity index, a matrix rather, is a good approach to putting every one of the risks that you might consider affecting your meeting into perspective. So if you look at something that has a very high probability and is quite severe, that's something you need to make sure you have an immediate plan for, you know what to do, how to deal with it. Something that could occur, might occur, is a big problem. On the other hand, you might have something that isn't very severe and the probability isn't likely to happen. So let's say, for example, you might have the copy machine break down. That's a remote possibility in the process of things, perhaps, but the severity of it's not too great. If you have another alternative plan, you deal with it. You don't have to necessarily put that in your overall planning, but the extreme aspect of it, planning for typhoons and the probability of that and the situation of what might occur, that could be a much more severe issue. So let's take one issue that planners, organizers of meetings today are dealing with worldwide, and it's been a factor for a number of years. It's always an issue of attrition or less attendance than what you expected to get for your conference. Things that might affect that, or why that might happen. The economic situation might mean that people simply don't have the support from their companies or the money to come. Weather factors, the time of the year that you chose happens to be typhoon season. Visas. Now, we ran into this issue, a very predominant issue that happened back in 2008 with the Olympics when China mainland became much more restrictive on visas. It affected a lot of the corporations and how they were going to go about planning their events around the Olympics. Destination selection. You pick a destination that's very popular, that could be a good factor, but what if you chose Bangkok? And we'll talk about that in a situation that happened. Back a couple of years ago, it might have looked really good, but then all of a sudden you had the political uprising, and that becomes a problem for your attrition. Competing and conflicting events that might happen, other similar organizations to yours that are planning something around the same time. Lack of historical data. Maybe in the past you have not tracked the information properly for your history. And what I found here is that in Hong Kong, hotels may know this themselves, but they don't tend to think about this as something that they want to pass on to their to their organizations that they deal with. So maybe they don't have that information. Management of the room block and banquet guarantee kind of goes hand in hand with the negotiation terms, is that you can set time frames that are realistic for you in terms of when you know what your attendance is going to be, and be able to make adjustments at a point in time when it's still appropriate to do that without a financial loss to you and your organization, where you can make those kind of adjustments. So looking at that from the Fishbone perspective, what you see on the right-hand side is the attrition and attendance. And then you have economics, weather, destination, history, legal, government, contract. These are all issues that affect what might potentially be the areas that happen. And then you can look at that in more depth. So under economics, well, you have to do some forecasting. Under weather, look at what the storm patterns are in the area and see what your contingency plans might be. In the destination, are there competing groups? What about local members? Is there a strong local membership support? Emergency preparedness of that area, and so on. Now, this is something you should become very familiar with and be able to do one of these if you were to be given something like that, and be able to back that up and know how to put together a fishbone diagram. Okay, once we now have identified it, we have to plan for it. So in a risk management process, we have to do planning, we have to assess and identify what are the most important ones, looking at that severity aspect and the probability, and make sure that we're planning for the right ones. We have to then create what our response might be to our stakeholders and specialists. Who, what, when, where, how, why. How are you going to do it, basically? MPI has a risk plan in terms of how they say you go about this in terms of stages. As we said, we identify the risk first, we analyze and prioritize the risks, we select techniques and strategies to deal with them, and we develop contingency plans. And then we monitor them as we go through it. So it's essentially a step process. In terms of recognition of it, you have to look at, are we complying with legal and regulatory obligations? Simple fact of how many exhibit stands you might be able to get into the ballroom where you're planning to do that part of your event. You might be limited in terms of that. So what's the risk of not being able to get enough to support your event in terms of enough sponsors and revenue, so on. How to manage for emergencies, complying with health and safety requirements. We'll talk more about that, specifically related to the APAC CRE conference that happened in Singapore a couple of years ago. And then acquiring insurance, which we'll also talk more about, another factor that can help to alleviate some of the risk on yourself, and arranging security, and we'll talk a little bit more about that specifically right now. Planning for security, safety and security, and you see this great looking guard sitting here in the process to represent it. If you are the International Association of Auditorium Managers, you have a particular plan that's put in place based on the government levels of severity, and starting from low to severe. So if you look, say, at the middle, number 3, you see at an elevated level there's restrictive measures may put in place, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and you may involve some of the regional and local authorities, up to the severe, where you basically cancel things, lock everything down. Let's look at that more specifically. Okay, what actions they take? Well, first off, they say everyone should be wearing an ID badge. Okay, that's one way to identify people to begin with. But from the front of the house, public access to the lobbies. At levels 2 to 4, main points of egress are always going to have someone there to check on and check the people. At 2 and 3 levels, though, you're just going to like spot check bags. You're not going to look at everyone. And level 4, no bags allowed. Back of the house, at level number 3, maybe an exhibitor needs to be accompanied to the loading dock by security. At level number 4, no one. So if you're going to plan for this in terms of your event, you have to go down a checklist and say, okay, let's consider who our attendees and our speakers are. Is there anyone controversial? Is there any potential issues with that? How about media coverage? Is it likely that the media will be there and involved? And we plan to protect the corporate property. If you have patented items and so on, how are those going to be taken care of? Keep attendees' health in mind. Again, we'll talk more about some of those issues that related to what happened with APAC CRE in Singapore a couple of years ago. Of course, check with your convention service manager and so on is a recommendation to know what the other groups are in the hotel that might even affect you. So that's not only your group, sometimes it's others around you, and then meet with the security people and discuss what the plans are during your site inspection. If your company has a security team, ask them. Determine control access to the meeting, how you're going to set it up so that people check badges, get tickets for the event, whatever it might be that you're trying to do. Meet vendors and provide services and ensure what they can do, what they can't do, and what security medical school staff are available there. And share your security information with your attendees in order to make sure that they're aware within the program or on your website, and conduct emergency training. Let's look at a hotel guest room security and public space aspect. Some security measures that you might put in place. Guest room doors. Self-closing, self-locking, bolt locks, viewports. I think this is pretty much expected today, but maybe you're dealing with older hotels or other locations where you're dealing with maybe 3-star hotels that don't have that. What are the actual situations there, and who holds the key, if you will? What are the emergency lighting systems? Clearly identifiable exits, key control. Who has access to master keys on the floors, in the meeting space, all of that. Lock replacement. Well, if you're dealing with guest rooms, you probably don't have lock replacement issues, but maybe you have keyed areas to the meeting space or to the storage area you might have, and you need to know who has keys to that. Adequate lighting levels in outdoor areas and trimming of landscape and so on become issues you have to be concerned about. Technology additions for security today are really positive for us from a standpoint of meetings. Mag locks on doors. That's the safety and security that we deal with today without keys. Surveillance cameras, CCTV aspects, you're being watched all the time. Intercom systems with panic buttons, digital video recording equipment, metal detectors, and so on. Those are all issues that you have to deal with. In order to be more secure in the future, stronger control over vendor passes and photo IDs. Metal detectors, heaven forbid, but it can be a factor. Daily review of government websites in terms of what's going on. Those are suggested ones in North America you see there, but there are many different ways to look at that. More awareness of security concerns and design of buildings, and even wanding people before they come in. Okay, that ends our first section of recording.